I have seen the torch of freedom pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dream some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home.
Good evening, and welcome to another edition of Character Matters.
To the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all. So with deep
I'm Dr. George Simon, and welcome to the program. Tonight we're going to have an interesting topic. We're going to be talking about shame and the difference between toxic shame and what I consider to be good shame. And we'll be talking about other matters too. This is a program about character matters because character does matter, perhaps today more than it has in a long time. This is a great country, and we enjoy a great deal of freedom in this country. And our freedom is always placed at risk when we misbehave. And unfortunately, in our country right now, we have a crisis on our hands where we have far too many of us not taking our responsibilities all that seriously and putting our freedom, our very precious freedom, in peril as a result. So this is a program about character matters. It's based on my years of clinical experience and work and the material that I have written in my 3 books, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, and my second book, Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age. Both of those books published by Parker's Brothers Publishers. And my third book, The Judas Syndrome, published by Abingdon Press. I wrote these books because of the problems that I see facing our society and the things that I thought we needed to address as both a society and especially as a culture to address what I consider to be the defining phenomenon of our age. In a few moments, I'm going to open up the phones for anybody who wants to call in and join the discussion, especially the discussion that we're going to have today on the issue of shame. But before we get into that, I want to say a few things about where you can find some more of my material and where you can find more information about some of the things that we'll be talking about tonight. I have a blog on the web at www.manipulative-people.com. Don't forget the hyphen in there. That's www.manipulative-people.com. I post 1 article per week on this blog. I've got hundreds of articles already on this blog. And the blog is a great resource for you if you have, unfortunately, the experience to be involved with someone who is of questionable character and who has made your life miserable, especially if you've been involved with a manipulative person who can make you feel pretty crazy. They are the kinds of people where you know that there's something wrong with them, but somehow they manage to have you thinking there's something wrong with you. You know that you should take a stand, but somehow they manage to always get you to giving in, and therefore they make you feel kind of crazy. This is a great resource, the blog is, for folks who find themselves in that kind of a relationship. And it's an especially good resource, I think, because we have many readers to this blog, and they contribute valuable information, not only in their responses and comments to the blog articles that I write, but in many of the stories that they share about their experiences. As a matter of fact, I consider the readership of my blog to be perhaps even a greater resource than the material that is out there, because of the richness of experience that they have to share. And I'm always edified when somebody writes in to say that they have used one of the principles that I've advocated in my books to deal with a problem of theirs, and to resolve it, or to empower themselves in their lives. So you can visit my blog, and you can also visit my website, www.drgeorgesimon.com. That's DRGEORGESIMON.com. Or I have videos that you can see on YouTube. I have several videos that are excerpts from various webinars that have either been done in the past or are being put together for future publication. And some of these videos have informative information about how to deal not just with manipulative people, but folks with all kinds of what I call disturbances of character. The people who can make you kind of crazy, both at work, at home, in any of your relationships, whether it be with a controlling spouse or a manipulative boss. You'll find some resources there. So visit my blog, www.manipulative-people.com, or my website, www.drgeorgesimon.com. I also contribute articles weekly to a popular blog that's based in the United Kingdom called Psychology, Philosophy, and Real Life. And you can reach that blog at www.counseling with two L's, counselingresource, all one word, .com. That's www.counselingresource.com. And as I said, today's program is going to be devoted to shame, a very misunderstood concept, and one of which has taken a bad rap, I think, in recent years, largely because I think folks don't understand it, don't understand the valuable role that it can play in character formation, and it's really been given a bad name, unfortunately, especially by much of the research that's been done in the past 20 or 30 years. What exactly is shame? Well, shame is that bad feeling we have about ourselves when we've done wrong things, things that are contrary to societal norms or expectations, things that our faith or things that our parents or things that society in general has told us are inappropriate or immoral behaviors. It's different from guilt because guilt has much more to do with feeling bad about what you've done as opposed to who you are. Now, let me say that again. Guilt has more to do with the bad feelings you have as a result of what you have done, whereas shame has to do with the bad feelings that you might have about yourself as a person. And all the research that's been done, except for one tiny little study, which I'll talk about not too far from now, by one researcher, the vast majority of the research in the last 20 or 30 years has basically condemned all shame as a bad thing. And parents have been urged teachers have been urged, don't shame your kids in any way. Don't use shame as a way, as a motivational vehicle for instilling character in people. And I think this came out of basically the pop psychology and the self-help movement of the late 70s, 80s, and 90s. There were tons of books written at that time, all about toxic shame. And I think that these books largely equated toxic levels of shame with shame and didn't bother to distinguish between shame that could be constructive and shame that was indeed toxic and destructive to the human spirit. Shame can indeed be toxic. People can be invited to feel too badly about themselves. They can engage in too much self-condemnation, and that certainly can be bad. But not all shame is at that level, and not all shame is bad. At least that's my opinion, and it's been my experience through my years of clinical research and through my years of dealing with hundreds of individuals. I've spent my career dealing essentially with two kinds of individuals. The first group are folks that have found themselves, unfortunately, on the receiving end of manipulative behavior or other kinds of disturbed character behavior. These are folks that have been in relationships, either at work or at home, where they have encountered someone of poor character who has made their lives a living hell. So I worked with these folks to help give them the tools to empower themselves in their dealings with these nefarious characters in their lives, and to explain to them that they're not crazy, explain to them what really makes the disturbed characters in their life tick, and giving them tools to empower themselves in all their relationships, and also to make better judgments about the individuals that they come into contact with, so they can better spot, say, a manipulator or some other disturbed character before it's too late. So I've spent a lot of time in my clinical practice working with that group of folks, but I've also spent an equal amount of time, perhaps even a greater amount of time, dealing with folks who have one level of character disturbance or another. Now, I should say from the outset that not everybody is a full-blown sociopath or psychopath. This has gotten to be kind of a vogue topic these days, and you even have books, the title of which suggests that I'm thinking of one in particular called The Sociopath Next Door. It makes a good point. It makes the point that not all sociopaths or not all psychopaths are the people who make headlines or are serial killers or the folks that commit egregious crimes. In fact, some of them are the snakes in suits, some of whom could be living right next door to you and who have the capacity for incredible charm and have the capacity to win people over and are good and skilled at the art of what we call impression management. So they can seem like the average Joe or the average Gene. I see we have a call coming in already. I'm going to answer this call just to see who it is, and we'll interrupt for just a moment. Hello, welcome to the program.
Hi, I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
I'm a big fan of your blogs and read as much that you write as I can, and I just wanted to ask you which book would be better for my situation. I just found out in the fall my husband had several affairs, massage parlors, the whole thing. He is going to a therapist. He is joined the 12.
Excuse me, what kind of therapist?
I don't know.
That's important. We'll come back to that, okay?
Yes. And he is in a 12-step program for his behavior, and he says he's sorry.
Is this 12-step program an addiction model type program?
Yes, for sex addicts.
Okay, and so I take it that he's been diagnosed as having a sexual addiction?
Yes.
Okay, we'll talk about that as well. Thank you. Go ahead.
So, I just wanted to ask, how do I know what kind of perspective his therapist is taking? Will I know? Is it any of my business? How do I ask without looking like I'm trying to control his therapy? And which book that you've written do you think is best for me to read?
Well, I mean this seriously. I think actually both books would be important, both Character Disturbance and In Sheep's Clothing, and let me tell you why. Although Character Disturbance expands upon my first book, and it gives you more of a framework to better assess the character of a wide variety of individuals, and it also gives you some vignettes about the kind of therapy that's necessary to address these kinds of problems. Besides that, In Sheep's Clothing gives you an idea of some things to be wary of with addiction model type treatments. Okay. And it also gives you a better insight into the tactics that folks will use to kind of keep you at bay and to basically manage your impression of them when they're not really doing all they need to be doing to get their act together, so to speak. So, frankly, I would recommend both books. It sounds like I'm just hawking both books, but and you're going to find a lot of overlap. I'll tell you that right in advance. You will find a lot of overlap in two parts of the book, between the two books, but I still think that both are helpful. Okay, great. Okay. But I want to get back to two things that you mentioned. I am not one of the skeptics who says that genuine sexual addictions don't exist. I do believe that genuine sexual addictions exist. Okay. But I also caution folks to be wary because this has become an industry. And I'm always wary of industries in my field. It's a character issue. And it's a zeitgeist issue. We kind of get on little bandwagons within the field. And this is the current in vogue treatment. And just about anybody who has sexual misbehavior problems, very frequently they will get diagnosed as having sexual addiction. And here's the problem. The way the criteria is set up, you know, it's kind of like a straw man. You invent the criteria, and then somebody meets the criteria, and then you say, aha, this is proof they have it. Well, the problem is that the criteria have never been empirically demonstrated to be valid in the first place. Do you understand what I mean by that? Sure. So, unfortunately, we have an industry that's developed. And in my experience, now I can't make a fair and accurate judgment in anyone's particular case. I want to make that disclaimer right off the bat. But by and large, there's an overdiagnosis that goes on here and a tendency to overly prescribe these modes of treatment as the treatment of choice. So you have to be careful. And really, whether somebody uses this type of program to their benefit, to turn their behavior around and to make of themselves a better person, is largely up to the person. So your husband or partner could use this program perfectly to really make significant changes. So I'm not going to condemn that. But you do need to be careful. Same thing is true with the type of therapy. Now, is the therapy that he's receiving, is it strictly in conjunction with this program? No. So it's with a separate therapist.
Oh, absolutely. Right. He meets with a therapist every week, and then he goes to meetings separately.
Okay, that's excellent. Do you know anything about the therapist orientation?
No, I mean, he's very opposed to sex outside of marriage. You know, it's not like he's saying, well, what do you really want? You know, I mean, he's trying to corral my husband. And my husband says he wants the marriage to work and he's very sorry, but I mean, he's lied for 14 years to me and I had no idea this was happening. I mean, absolutely zero. It was all very hidden.
Are we talking about multiple affairs over a 14-year period?
Yes, there were some maybe 2 years with nothing in between, but pretty much every year, and lots of pornography, which I had no idea about.
Okay. We're talking tonight about shame. This is kind of an interesting area that we could expand on just a little bit. The reason why you can't divorce character issues from the problem, even if a genuine addiction exists here. Let me make a point here that's very important, not just for you. I want my listening audience to really pay attention to this. And I'm going, if you don't mind, I'm going to use you as an example, okay? If you don't mind.
Sure.
I'm going to make some assumptions, but let's make a hypothetical case. Let's just say that you fell into a really bad habit. Let's say that you fell into the habit of stealing at the supermarket. Little things, shoplifting little things, and it kept getting worse. And you felt both guilt over what you were doing and shame, because this is not the kind of person you see yourself as being, not the kind of person you want to be, and it's kind of tearing you up inside. What do you think you might do?
I might try to stop.
Okay, and what if your repeated attempts to stop failed? What might you do?
I'd probably go to my pastor or a therapist or somebody for help.
Okay. Now, here's my point about why people overlook character issues and why it's time we stopped overlooking character issues. In those 14 years, did your husband ever run and knock on the door of somebody and say, I need help?
Well, no, and he actually lied to the therapist. He was seeing a therapist, and he never told him.
Okay.
And that's why I love you. Like, I love your blog. Like, I read every single page for hours because I think this is a character problem rather than a neuroses completely. Like, I get it. That's why.
Well, most of the time it's not as black and white as an either or. You understand what I'm saying?
Sure.
You can have a broken leg and skin cancer at the same time. Matter of fact, you can have a broken leg, skin cancer, diabetes, and a whole host of other things at the same time. So you can get to the point where you have developed a genuine sexual addiction and still have character issues that need to be addressed. And that's why I asked you about the orientation of the therapist, because when character issues are involved, in other words, when there isn't enough shame, and when there isn't enough guilt to make someone say, you know what, this is not the kind of person I want to be. This is threatening the good things I have in my marriage. This has the potential of doing great damage to the person I love. This is not doing me any good either, and I really need to get help. When that's involved, you really need to be seeing a therapist who adopts an entirely different approach to therapy. Traditional methods of therapy, traditional insight-oriented psychotherapy was never, ever meant to deal with character problems. It was meant to deal with a phenomenon that we call neurosis. And neurosis means a person is overly riddled with guilt and shame about the things that they think about doing. they're overly anxious, they're hung up, their self-esteem is in the toilet. Those are the things that traditional therapy is meant for. When character issues are involved, the therapy has to focus on cognitions, the way we think, our attitudes, our core beliefs, the things we tell ourselves repeatedly, the way we think about things, the way we look at the world, the way we see our marriage, the way we see our place in the world. Those cognitions and behavioral habits, the things we do habitually, the kinds of behavior patterns that we reinforce over time, and they become second nature to us, and that can even become addictions. So the therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, is highly specialized for character problems, and it focuses on those two things. Now, I should make one other caveat. Many therapists know that the correct answer to doing therapy with somebody who has character issues is cognitive behavioral therapy. So if you ask them, what kind of therapy are you going to use, they know that the right answer to give is cognitive behavioral therapy. Unfortunately, most of the time, clinicians forget the behavior part of cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive therapy is relatively easy, talking to somebody about the way they think about things and appealing to their better judgment to perhaps think about things in a different way. That part's easy. But focusing on behavior, calling it in the moment that it occurs, challenging it, getting the person to try out new behaviors, reinforcing that new behavior, planning strategically for new behavior patterns to develop that are healthier to replace old behavior patterns. That's an entirely different kind of therapy, behavior therapy, and most therapists that I know, and I'm not exaggerating about this, they have a real distaste for behavior therapy. Most of us were trained eclectically. In other words, we know about behavior therapy, but most therapists I know really don't like behavior therapy, and they stay away from it. But it's an absolutely essential component of good therapy with a character-impaired person. Does that make sense to you?
Sure.
Okay. I hope I've answered your questions there. Did you have any additional questions?
No, this is great. Thank you. I'll keep listening to your show.
Well, thank you so much for calling in. Well, we've been talking about shame, and we're going to continue the discussion here. And if we get another call, we'll be glad to interrupt and take it. I want to talk about some of the criticisms that the shame research over the past 20 or 30 years has made about shame. Here's literally one of the conclusions of one shame study that was a study that looked at all the shame studies, kind of a meta-analysis, looked at all the shame studies over the past 20 or 30 years and concluded that, once again, shame is just a bad thing and we should do away with it. This study makes the point that, one, shame attacks the person instead of the behavior. And two, it damages self-esteem. I want to speak to that just a little bit. We are of this notion, and we have been since the pop psychology revolution of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we have been of this notion that you can simply never have enough self-esteem, and that any blows to the self-esteem is bad. I take issue with this in both of my books, In Sheep's Clothing and Character Disturbance. I even take issue with it a bit and give some good examples of it in the Judas syndrome. But to make a long story short, one of the things that you have to realize is that self-esteem is a very different thing from what I call self-respect. And I'm one of the few out there who makes this distinction. And I want to speak to just a little bit about the origins of the two terms and what they really mean, because many times we throw these terms around loosely. Esteem literally means to estimate worth. The root, the Latin word estimare, literally means to make a guess about or make an estimate about worth. So self-esteem is the intuitive hunch we make about what we're worth as a person. And self-esteem generally arises from the intuitive awareness we have about the positive attributes that we have. Some of these things come along with nature, such as our intellect. Maybe we are blessed with good looks. Maybe we are blessed with talents in certain areas. And the person who knows this, they know where their gifts are, they know what they've got going for them, they know what skills they've developed, they have kind of an intuitive sense about what they've got going for them, and their self-esteem can be quite high. Self-respect has to do, the word respectere in Latin means literally to look back. We get the word spectacles from spectere, and respectere means to look back. Self-respect has to do with looking back on what you have done with the gifts that you have been given, and making an appraisal of yourself as a person of worth to the community at large. Self-esteem is not the same thing as self-respect. And you can have entirely too much self-esteem. So the notion that shame damages self-esteem, and that's always bad, I take issue with, because if shame has the potential to deflate an ego that's way blown out of shape, that's a good thing. And I'll speak more to that later. The critics of shame also say that shame gets passed on to kids who relive the stigma of shame. In other words, parents who come from a toxic shame place pass the bad me kind of image down to their kids. They treat them in ways that make their kids feel bad about themselves, and then the cycle perpetuates. And there's a certain amount of truth to that, especially with regard to toxic shame. But it's not a blanket assumption that that's always the case. The critics of shame also say that shame always evokes a negative or angry emotional response on the part of the person, and that's bad. Well, anger can be a positive, good motivator, especially if channeled right. Now, self-condemnation, negative and persistent and excessive self-condemnation, can be bad. But negative self-appraisal and anger at oneself in the right doses and channeled correctly can be a real turnaround motivator for people. So we'll talk about that in a little bit greater depth in just a minute. Also, the critics of shame say that shame always leaves you feeling helpless and inadequate. Well, shame doesn't always leave a person feeling helpless and inadequate. At toxic levels, it can certainly make you feel helpless, but not necessarily at good levels. And so we're going to talk in a minute about what a healthy sense of shame would be all about and what it could do for a person in rebuilding a character that has been damaged by misbehavior, especially misbehavior of a wide variety of types and over a long period of time. We'll talk about that. I also want to talk a bit about the difference between neurotics and disturbed characters on the dimension of both shame and guilt. Folks who read my blogs regularly and who are familiar with my books know that I lovingly refer to those folks with perhaps an overactive conscience and who fret too much and who are overly hung up as good old-fashioned neurotics. Back in the old days, back in way back days, in the days when all of our modern theories of personality were developed by Sigmund Freud and his followers, the traditional theories, there were actually folks running around with toxic levels of neurosis, folks who were such nervous wrecks that they came to Freud and his associates with all kinds of bizarre symptoms, from paralyses that had no foundation in physical fact, to numbnesses that had no neurological origins, to all kinds of crazy symptoms that really had to do with the fact they were overly riddled with unnecessary guilt, unwarranted levels of guilt and shame. And so, in those days, neurosis kind of had a bad name. These days, most neurosis is at a level that I would call functional. And that is, what I mean by that is most people have just enough hang-ups in their personality. They experience just enough anxiety and fret and worry about things to conduct themselves in a socially responsible way. In other words, when their primal urge is to just go ahead and do something, just go ahead and lash out at somebody, go ahead and cuss somebody out that you're angry with, or go ahead and tell your boss what you really think of him or her. When folks think about that, they have a little hesitation. They have a little bit of unnerved feeling in their gut about doing such a thing, and that way they don't just go ahead and just do it, and that's a good thing. So even though shame has a bad name, and even though neurosis has a bad name, at functional levels, both are good. Neurosis is what makes society work. And shame and guilt are both parts of that. Now, neurotic people and character disordered people, and people who are not quite character distorted but are character disturbed in some way, they have quite a bit of difference in their personality makeup with respect to how they respond to and how they're equipped when it comes to matters of guilt and shame. Neurotics have a big sensitivity to both guilt and shame. They don't like to feel guilty. They get upset when they feel guilty. And they feel guilty perhaps too easily, too readily, more readily than they need to feel. When they're even thinking about doing something that they think someone would disapprove of, they even have some kind of twinges of guilt. They're also very sensitive to feeling ashamed of themselves. And this is one of the reasons why shame and guilt are great manipulation tactics in the hands of character disturbed or character disordered people. The disturbed character knows that you as a neurotic person are sensitive to feeling guilty or shameful. And so if they invite you to feel guilty about something, you're likely to stop whatever you're doing and backtrack. So, for example, you call the character disturbed person on some behavior that they did. Perhaps they've given you reason. We had a caller just a moment ago to talk about serial philandering in their spouse. Let's say you have to confront your spouse because they're doing some things that are making you suspicious again that they've been having affairs once again. So you confront them. You confront them on the things that they're doing that are giving rise to your suspicion. Well, they might come back at you with something like, you're always suspecting me. You never have anything, you never place any trust in me anymore. I haven't done anything in years. What is it with you? I can never seem to do anything right. I've tried to behave myself. I've apologized, but you never cut me a break. When they're doing those kinds of things and inviting you to feel shameful, inviting you to feel bad about yourself for even daring to suspect or daring to confront, and when they're inviting you to feel guilty for having done so, the neurotic person is going to take that very seriously. And they might even back down or back off. Instead of saying, look, you've given me a reason to feel suspicious again. And it's not my fault that I'm suspicious. You're the one that betrayed trust. Trust takes a long time to repair. I have a right to be skeptical. And when you act in these ways, I'm going to get suspicious. And instead of that, the neurotic person might say, okay, you're right. Maybe I get on you too much. Maybe it is my fault. Maybe I'm not giving you credit. And then they back off. And this is how manipulation works. This is exactly how manipulation works. And you can prove that to yourself because if you try to use these very same tactics on a character disturbed or character disordered person, they won't work. You can shame character disturbed person all you want. You can shame them till you're blue in the face. It won't faze them. You can guilt them till the sun rises the next day, and it won't faze them. Why? Because if guilt or if shame were really something that they were sensitive to, they probably wouldn't have done what they did in the first place. They wouldn't have been able to live with themselves as a person having done so. Or they would have quickly felt badly about what they did and made amends and resolved not to do it again. That's how guilt and that's how shame work. So there's a big difference between how neurotic folks handle shame and how character disturbed folks handle shame. And in my experience, this is something I really want to emphasize. I've worked with some of the most severely disturbed characters out there. For years, I consulted to correctional institutions, setting up programs for correctional counselors to rehabilitate folks who are eventually going to get out on parole and for whom we hoped could function more adaptively and not recidivate, not come back into prison on new offenses. I consulted for many years to these institutions helping to set up these programs, and for a period of time I even worked for some institutions and ran some of these programs. But by and large, with severe character disturbance, you don't see much change. When you're talking about a fully character disordered person, somebody whose character is so flawed, and somebody whose view of the world and the way their approach to life, the way they approach the world and their dealings with everybody in it, the attitudes they hold, is so flawed and so skewed, so self-serving, and so without a moral compass, that they're going to repeatedly do the kinds of things that get them into trouble, and they don't change very easily. But I have seen people change, even people with significant character disturbance. And I will tell you, in my experience, I have never seen a person change merely because they felt guilty about something. As a matter of fact, I know several people, I've seen people in group therapies, severely disturbed characters and disordered characters, some of whom were violent offenders, some of whom among the men were spousal abusers, who felt badly every time they did what they did. Genuinely felt badly, and who might still cry when recounting an episode when they did something. So feeling the guilt over what they did was not enough. First of all, it wasn't enough to get them to stop doing it because they felt guilty every time. As a matter of fact, it might have been one of the triggers that led them into the vicious cycle. Maybe they felt guilty, then they tried to drown out their bad feelings with substances, and then once they got cranked up on substances, of course you know what happens, they offended even more. So guilt wasn't enough to stop them. But inevitably what I found with the people that did change, with folks that did make a significant turnaround in their lives, the one thing that stood out is these folks could no longer live with the kind of person that they had become. In other words, they didn't like who they saw in the mirror anymore. This was a self-image issue. It was a shame issue. They no longer liked themselves. And it wasn't shame at a toxic level where they wanted to just condemn themselves and be done with themselves or write themselves off. No, it wasn't. But it was shame at a constructive level, whereby they said, I'm making a commitment. I'm making a commitment to be better than that, however I have to do it. Whether it be working my 12-step program, whether it be restoring my faith, whether it be working the tenets of my religion, whether it be getting the therapy I need, getting confronted every week as I expect my therapist who does cognitive behavioral therapy to confront my distorted thinking and to confront my manipulative behavior in the here and now when it occurs every week in that session. Boy, it's uncomfortable because he nails me every time, but that's exactly what I need because I'm determined to change my life. And people don't make that kind of turnaround life decision unless they no longer like the person they are. Unless they look at their history of behavior and they say, you know, this was just a really bad me. And I no longer want to be that guy. I no longer want to be that person. That's not the person that I aspire to be, and that's not the person that I want to see myself as any longer. This is what constructive shame looks like. So when you read all those self-help books out there and you read all those articles in the pop psychology magazines or Psychology Today or whatnot, discount all the findings on shame as being a bad thing, period. There is one study that's recently been done that calls attention to this fact. I'm familiar with one author here whose name is Brene Brown, and also Laura Kerr writes about Brene Brown's research. Both of them have come to the conclusion, after years of looking at the research, that indeed, in the right doses and in the right quality, shame is a really good thing, and that it's really instrumental to character formation. And I think that they have it exactly right. This was my experience all along. I've seen it way too many times. And as far as it damaging self-esteem, there are some people who really needed to have a dose of self-esteem correction. And so when they no longer feel good about the kind of person they are, and they no longer feel good because they've done too many bad things in their life, this kind of correction of the self-esteem can be a good thing. It kind of straightens out the balance that needs to be there with a healthy opinion of oneself. And for a while, perhaps self-esteem does need to be a little bit lower than it has been, until the person demonstrates to themselves that they can really be a better sort. With time and with effort and with a demonstrated track record of success, not only can they restore their self-esteem, but they build what I referred to earlier as self-respect. They can look back on the things that they have done, and they can look back not with false pride, but with genuine pride at the things that they have done, and they can take that healthy pride in turning their lives around, making amends to the people in their lives that they needed to make amends to, and gotten on a better track, so that when they look in the mirror and they size themselves up, they can like the person they see once again. They can have an image that they can be satisfied with, an image that they can be proud of in a healthy way. So that's healthy shame in my book, and it's something that we need more of. You know, I have an example to give. My grandchildren were playing in the yard. I have 2 grandchildren, beautiful grandchildren, but they are kids, and you know, kids are just naturally kind of uncivilized brutes. You know, they have to be raised. We have to teach these kids right from wrong, and we have to develop character in them, and that's a 24-hour-a-day, many-year process. Character doesn't come overnight, and we're not born with it. But they were playing on the trampoline the other day, and my oldest grandchild, he's older than his sister by 2 years, and one of his favorite pastimes is really irritating his sister. He finds this amusing, as a lot of 6-year-old boys do. This can be a real source of amusement to see what kind of irritation you can cause your little sister. At any rate, they're out on the trampoline, and she is trying to show me a trick that she has learned to do, and she wants me to watch. She's kind of proud she can do this tumble, and she wants me to watch, see how she does it. Meanwhile, her brother is liking to pretend that he's going to dart out and interfere with her jump, and this shakes her up and gets her to miss. And this gives him no end of joy, because this irritates her, and she hollers at him. So she's in the process of doing this flip, and right at the moment she's about to show me how well she can do this, of course he does this behavior again. It startles her, and it upsets her. And of course I chastise him for this, but the look on his face is not just that he knows that he's done something wrong. So he knows that there should be guilt involved here, that he's done a wrong thing. But there's also something else involved in that little grin that he gives that indicates not only does he know that he's done the wrong thing, but that he's okay with it, and he somehow savors that. So me just telling him it's wrong is not enough. He knows it's wrong. I have to give him what I call that look. You know what I mean by that look? Anybody's mom or dad ever given them that look? You remember what that look looks like? That look that invites you to feel like, you know what? They're not thinking of me too well right now. Not just for what I've done, but they're not thinking of me too well right now as a person. They don't approve, not just of that particular behavior, but they don't approve of me, especially with that slop bucket grin on my face right now, like that kind of behavior is okay. Not only is that not okay, but I'm not okay. I'm not okay with that behavior or with that slop bucket grin on my behavior. Or that slop bucket grin on my face, I should say. So a little dose of shaming in just the right way, and sometimes it can be with just a look, just a glance, can be really instrumental and really constructive. It's not going to cause the child to hang their head low and think of themselves so terribly that they now go into a major depression and you're the reason why, and they're going to need years of therapy to overcome their toxic shame. No, it doesn't work that way. Little doses of shame go a long way, especially done constructively, toward building character. Think of all the behavior, the nefarious behavior that's made headlines that you've witnessed in some of these politicians these days who've done these crazy things, and then they have the nerve to run again or to want to stay in office after they've been caught doing the most horrendous things. And you ask yourself, have they no shame? Well, the answer to the question, of course, is no, they don't. Because if they did, if they had enough of a sense of shame, if they had enough of a sense of how this kind of behavior would look to other people and how people would appraise them in character for what kinds of behaviors they have done, then they wouldn't do it. And if they did do it, they would have the decency to say, you know what? Maybe I don't have the character to really do this job. Character matters. You know, that's what this program is all about. Character matters. It matters today more than ever. Our freedom depends on it. Our freedom is being restricted every single day by a government that wants to impose rules on us already responsible people. You know, every law depends on the voluntary compliance of people of good character. I always give the example of the sign on the door to the prison, on the gate with barbed wire that says, no firearms, tobacco, or drugs of any type permitted on these premises. So the person that's come to smuggle in dope, you think they turn away at the sight of that sign and say to themselves, oh my goodness, I can't do this? No, this is ridiculous. That rule's not meant for them. People of disturbed character don't pay attention to the rules anyway. They only burden the already responsible. We can't legislate our way out of this problem. Character has to be taught, and it has to be taught early. It's a 24-hour 7-day-a-week process that takes years and years and years of careful nurturing. And when we nurture people of good character, we build a great society. And when we nurture a great society, we have a great country. A country that affords its people freedom. The freedom to be left alone and to prosper and to innovate and to make opportunities for everyone else. That's why character matters. It matters today, perhaps more than it's ever mattered before. And that's why I'm inspired to bring this message to you every week. And that's why I always want to be closing my program with the song that I was inspired to write many years ago now. It seems impossible to me that it was so long ago, back at the turn of the new millennium, back in 1999. It was an inspiration to write this song and praise our freedom that we treasure. Till next week, good night. See you at 7 Eastern on Character Matters.
Spread hope throughout this land as the dream some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own.